In this coming year, there's going to be a lot of challenges ahead facing the economy and the health sector. The ACA is being implemented at the state exchanges and the federal exchanges, and the states are expanding their Medicaid programs, so there's going to be big increases in demand. There's uncertainty about who is actually signed up for the various programs, so it should be a very challenging year for providers, insurers, the employers, and the public. And so we're very fortunate to have with us today three experts, the same three we had last year, so we can see how good their projections have been since last year, and if we remember, that is. So we're very fortunate to have Jim Glassman, John Gable, and Jim Baumgartner speak to us today on the economy, the employer sector, and the federal projections. And let me start by just briefly mentioning Jim Glassman's background. He's the managing director with J.P. Morgan Chase and the head economist for Chase Commercial Banking. And Dr. Glassman's been providing market insights to help clients better understand the challenging economy and its impact on their business. Before going to J.P. Morgan Chase, he was working for quite a few years at the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C., and so he has an excellent background to talk to us about the economy. So please join me in welcoming Jim Glassman.
Thank you, Paul, and Margaret and your team for the work you guys do. Morning, everybody, and morning to the folks in the overflow room. Behave yourself, we can see you. Folks, I think a lot of people are baffled that the economy is getting back on its feet because it did a lot of damage. And a question I always get is, because I think there's a lot of skepticism about what's going on, the question I always get is, well, what can go wrong that can throw us off course? So the kind of things I can think of is, well, we could worry that the European Union is going to blow away. We could have fiscal disarray that's going to take us over a fiscal cliff. We could have somebody downgrade U.S. debt and make people worry about what's going on in the U.S. We could do things like sequestration, shut down the government for a couple weeks. We could have an Arab Spring that starts to make us worry about the stability of Saudi Arabia, and oil prices jump, and that causes gas prices to go up. The problem is we've done all this, and the economy is recovering, and I think it's a reminder to me, it's a reminder that when you've come through a really tough time, expectations are very low, investors are very risk averse. It takes a lot to disappoint people. And so when bad things happen, nobody's surprised. And I think it's a reminder to me when you're coming out of bad times, it takes an awful lot to throw us off course. The problem we all have is when times are good and everybody's optimistic, it's not hard to be disappointed. And I think so that's why when I think about what we're dealing with, the kind of thing I worry about now is really more like asteroids. So I. Just a quick thought about how I think about the outlook ahead and how we think about what's going on. There's a lot of noise right now, and by the way, if you live out here, you may not realize, but it's like chaotic. And we're back to normal winters in the Midwest and the East. And winter's fine, winters happen all the time. The problem is we have not had winters for the last 10 years, so all the seasonal adjustment process that we go through to smooth out the data for seasons, the seasonals think there is no winter. And so all the data you're looking at right now is all messed up, and it's just so visible. You're not going to know what's really going on for a few months, but you know what? Come spring, you're probably going to see all the data that will start coming out, then it'll all start looking much better. The way I think about the economy is a little different than human beings. We tend not to reach our potential. That's not true for the economy. And the way we forecasters think about the economy, we sort of have in mind, where is our potential? Where do we need to be in order to think about what's going to get us there? Because I don't know how it happens, but When we stumble, what happens is there's lots of opportunities out there that open up, and businesses are pretty good about figuring out where the opportunities are, and that's what makes us get back on our feet. So the way I think about the economy that we're dealing with is there's a couple things to think about to give you an idea where we need to be. And the bottom line is that we're doing fine. We're on the mend. We are getting back on our feet. The problem is we're probably only in the fifth inning. We're only halfway there. And these pictures are sort of trying to give you a visual for thinking about that. Now, normally, we think about where is our potential by looking at the unemployment rate. We have an idea that there's a full employment level we want to be at. We care about that because that's sort of when you start to see inflation problems. The problem is the unemployment rate, which I'm showing you on the picture here, is kind of not telling you the right story. It's coming down very rapidly. And if you took this at face value, you would say, oh my God, the economy is getting back on its feet, the labor market's tightening up, the Fed should be doing something. The problem is the unemployment rate isn't telling you the whole story, and this is to help you understand why Janet Yellen and company are saying we got to think about the labor market more broadly. There's a lot more going on than you really see in the unemployment rate, and the reason is there's something really unique happening. So this visual is trying to give you an idea where we are in the cycle and what does it take to get back to our potential. In my mind, our potential is at the top of that green zone. So the blue line is showing you where employment has been. We've covered about 7 million jobs. We're marching higher. To get all those who are actually looking for a job and are unemployed back to something more normal, we need about another 3 million jobs, which would put us to the bottom of that green zone. That green zone is trying to identify a population out there that kind of vanished. You may know some of these people. You may own some of these people. They're called, I'm not talking about baby boomers who are retiring. I'm talking about the class of 2008, the class of 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13. Young people who got out of the school. They thought all you got to do is get your degree and then you get in the job market and life's there for you. There's a whole population of people who have dropped out, and the way you see it is by looking at their participation rates. And that green zone is identifying for you the folks out there who came out of school. They're under 45 years of age, so it's not just recent college grads. Under 45 years of age, came into the market, looked around, couldn't find much, gave up doing something else. Many of them went back to school. Some are working for NGOs in Africa. Some are teaching English in Thailand. That population probably did not disappear because they decided to go retire. You're 28-year-old, you're probably doing something because it's tough to get a job here. So what that means is that for us to get back to a fully employed economy, unlike what the unemployment rate is telling you, there's a lot of hidden unemployment out there. And as the market continues to improve, those folks are going to be coming back in. And so what the visual is claiming is that we're probably in the fifth inning of our economic recovery. And you shouldn't be shocked if, as we go forward, you see as the job market opens up, more people come in, the unemployment rate stops coming down. I would cheer if the unemployment rate went up and it was because the labor force was picking up speed again, because this is really a unique phenomenon. We've never really seen this. And this is why at the Fed, they're having to be much more circumspect about what's happening in the job market. And this is what Janet Yellen is talking about. People who are working part-time because they can't find a full-time job, 3 million more than normal. People who are unemployed for 6 months and more, about 3 million more than normal. And the young people who've kind of vanished from the job market, maybe they're living with you, but they're going to be coming back out again. So first thing to think about, where is our potential? This story tells you we've got a ways to go. We're doing fine, but we got a ways to go. And this is why the Fed is being very cautious. The real thing, though, the real thing that's going to be guiding the Fed is what's going on with inflation. The Fed's long-run goal is 2% inflation. Inflation is running 1%. At the end of the day, this is what guides what the Fed is going to do. And this picture is telling you that the economy, it's confirming the economy is underemployed. There isn't, people don't have a lot of pricing power, and therefore, you got to have a more robust economy in order to get inflation moving back up to where the Fed wants it. We've never really had to deal with this story. The Japanese have, but we've never really faced this. It's a new phenomenon. It's something that the Europeans are having to deal with. It's really a phenomenon that stretches across the developed economies. So for this reason, when you think about where are we going, the thing that guides my thought process is not so much the numbers, it's more where are we, where do we need to be? And because we still have a long way to go and there's a lot of underemployment and there's a lot of unemployment, that means there's a lot of opportunities out there for businesses to tap, and that's what makes the economy eventually keep moving forward and accelerate. So I think, in my mind, this is my own forecast for how to think about the next several years. I think it's a little on the optimistic side. 3.5% growth for a few years before we begin to settle down. But this is what we need in order to get the economy fully recovered, back to full employment. And I'll tell you a couple reasons why I think there's a good chance that's going to happen. But before I get there, let me just show you a couple things that I look at that I think tell you that what we're dealing with is for real. It's not a phony recovery that we've had. The thing that I put most weight on is jobless claims, layoffs. People apply for benefits every week. The black line, the scale is on the right-hand side, it's upside down. And I'm overlaying it on top of GDP growth. And the reason I like this is if you ask most of us economists, if you're only allowed to look at one thing, you can only look at one piece of information and that's it. I think most of us would tell you weekly jobless claims. And the reason is because wherever you live, whether it's Petoskey, Michigan, Monroe, Louisiana, Irvine, Chicago, New York, wherever, whether you work at a big firm or a small firm, wherever you are, if you lose a job, everybody belongs to the unemployment insurance system. Wherever you are, if you lose a job, you go file for unemployment benefit. I see you a week later. There's no guesswork here about what's going on. This is the real deal, the actual count of what's happening. And so we don't know why, when there are new trends developing, we don't know why they're happening. All we know is that something's going on. And the reason to point this out is because this thing has been telling you for a while that there's something going on. It's telling you what we economists learn. When you look at our history, we stumble a lot, we get back on our feet. And when we start to get back on our feet, it has a lot of momentum. And if you've just been paying attention to the black line, layoffs, that when that black line goes up, it means layoffs are coming down. Steadily coming down. And what that means is if you'd looked at this, you would have never really worried much about fiscal cliffs or Europe blowing up or debt ceiling crisis. You would realize that the economy's got a rhythm of its own. We had a very bad stumble, and it's got a lot of momentum. So this picture has been telling us for some time that we're in a new recovery dynamic. Secondly, the thing I like to look at is employment trends in all the states. So if this recovery was just all about gas shale, you could understand why Texas is booming and Oklahoma and the state of Pittsburgh and eastern Ohio and North Dakota. But if it was all about gas shale, it would just be narrowly concentrated in the energy belt. What this picture is showing you is employment trends across the country, every single state. We all started out at the same point in 2007, and it's showing you that we're all swimming upstream. So what that means is what we're living through right now is a synchronized recovery. No matter what your state is concentrated in, we're all doing the same thing. And it's an important signal to economists that there's something real and sustained and deep here that's going on. Thirdly, I've been most focused on trends in areas that suffered from the real estate debacle. California, Arizona, Nevada, Florida, because I always figured if the lights come back on in areas that were really hit badly by the speculative bubble and that they crashed, then there's something going on, and that's exactly what's happening here. California's employment trends obviously lagging the general economy, but it's pretty remarkable what's going on here, and you don't want to listen to anecdotes about real estate in LA and San Francisco because it sounds a little bit like the old days. This is different because there's a lot of outside money coming in, buying, and the real estate markets, all the anecdotes are starting to feel like a normal market. So let me just run through quickly. Is it reasonable to forecast that we're going to be doing better than we had been? Because it's been kind of a slow recovery. Honestly, for my taste, I'm amazed that we're even having much of a recovery, because if you think about it, if you think about the mistakes that were made and the magnitude of the underwater mortgage problem that we had back in 2007-8, when prices, we lost a third of the value of our houses, it was not hard to come up with a very pessimistic story about what was ahead. And the fact is, the U.S. economy is recovering out of this recession better than our partners in the developed community. We're doing better than the Europeans, we're doing better than the Japanese, and it baffles them because this is where the problems were started. So, you know, for me, I have been amazed that the recovery, it may be slow, it might be disappointing you, but for me, to have a recovery without the support of a housing industry yet, it just started last year, that's a pretty amazing story, because normally the housing industry recovers like everybody else, and it gives us a good half a point to a full point of growth. We haven't had that. That's been very unusual. And so to me, this is the real deal, what's going on. And as you look forward, there's reason to be a little more optimistic about where we're going than where we've been. Three things come to mind. There's three big headwinds we've been dealing with that are fading. Number one, the fiscal stimulus that we put in place in 2009 pumped a lot of money into the economy, and by design, it was intended to wind back as after a couple of years. If you were in the school system, you knew about this story because the budgets got very tight in 2010 as the federal money vanished. So for the first time in a very long time, this recovery, we got some help when we were going down. It cushioned the downturn, but we started unwinding a lot of this stimulus, and that's what's been going on for the past couple of years. The federal sector has not been contributing much to the growth of the U.S. economy, and you see that by looking at the contribution of the government sector to the GDP. See how unusual this period has been in the last couple of years compared to our normal cycles. So what we had to do on the fiscal side and how we've unwound it has been a huge headwind. That's largely behind us. This is really not so much the sequestration issue as it is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. That really, the money that we spent there has been fading out. So the fiscal side finally is turning less of a headwind. It probably will be a small positive. The Fed has talked a lot about this in their own discussions. Secondly, the European crisis was a very big deal for a lot of people, particularly the developing world. I never understood this myself because I'm kind of a history nut, and I think if you read the World War II era literature and you understand where our mindset was at the time, you realize there was a lot of pressure on Europe after that devastating, those two wars, to get their house in order and come together as a family. So when the market worried briefly that the European Union was going to blow up, it didn't make sense to historians, because this is more about a political motivation than it is about an economic motivation. And yet it forced the European community to do bad things to themselves. Fiscal austerity, which put them in a stall. When a third of the world's economy goes into a stall, when all the rest of us are trying to climb out of a recession, it was a very big deal for everybody. And this story is beginning to change, because if you look at that picture that I showed earlier, shows growth trends around the world, the European region finally is beginning to pick up speed again. So with the help of the European Central Bank and some of the actions Spain and Italy have been taking, the region is beginning to grow again, and that's going to feel a whole lot different for the next year or so than it has for the last couple of years. Finally, the housing nightmare was really a big problem for us. This is the contribution of the housing sector on GDP. For the first time, it was really not participating in the recovery. This is really becoming history. So when you look at the U.S. economy and you think about these big headwinds that have been holding us back, most of them are passing. And what that means is the underlying pace of the U.S. economy should be speeding up. And this is why many of us are becoming much more optimistic. And the forecast I showed you of the U.S. economy picking up speed, maybe growing 3 to 3.5%, is roughly a consensus view, and it's certainly a view held by the Fed, that for the next several years we should be expecting a little faster growth as some of these big headwinds fade out. There's a couple tailwinds that are also going on that are helping us. Lights are coming back on again in the manufacturing sector. You see this when you go to Texas, because businesses are coming back again, getting more interested in Mexico. Costs are getting more expensive in China. And the dollar, which I'm showing you on this picture, is very competitive levels. Real trade weighted value of the dollar means when this line goes down, you want to be located in the U.S., and this is why you're hearing, particularly in the Midwest, there's just an awful lot going on in the manufacturing sector. And we're still sort of working through this huge innovation in gas shale development. We haven't really figured out how to take advantage of it yet. It's still playing through. But when you have prices of oil and gas so far out of kilter, what this tells you is there's this huge incentive out there to do something about it. And so it's hard to exaggerate the significance of the shale development and the technology that we've developed to tap this, to open up this vast new source of energy. And this is going to become an important export industry for us. So I want to close on something else. You can be skeptical about what the outlook looks like. I think I tend to view the equity market as the jury in this debate, and the equity market really does the equity market really is telling you that something's going on. And the way to think about this, I hear some people say, well, gee, if it weren't for the Fed printing all this money, the equity market wouldn't be doing what it's doing. I think you got to remember that the equity market really doesn't take its cue from the Fed. We take our cue from what's going on in the business community. If the Fed is easy, but there's no reason to believe that the economy is recovering and companies are not producing earnings, you're better off to leave the money under the mattress. The thing to remember is that it's not the Fed that's been gutting the equity market, it's what's going on in the business community. The business community has been generating phenomenal profits. And what I'm showing you on this picture is a way to understand what's normal and not normal for the equity market. The black line is the Wilshire 5000 index. We're back in record territory. I'm overlaying it on top of business earnings, and I've structured the scale so that when the price earnings ratio of the stock market is equal to the historical average, that black line sits right on top of earnings. So think about last year. My community is a little baffled. Why is it that the equity market rose 30% or so last year when earnings really didn't do much? I really think that what's going on in the equity market is we're trying to come to grips with something that's been going on for a while. We're trying to, that picture that I just showed you showed that really what's going on is price valuation is back to normal. It's not like the stock market is expensive on a historical basis. And what we've been trying to come to grips with is what's reflected in this picture. What I'm showing you here is after-tax profits of American businesses as a share of GDP. This is something that none of us learned in school. Developed, advanced economies don't have the share of income going to profits skewing like this. Something big has been going on for 15 years. And what it's telling you is we really have had a hard time understanding whether this is for real. Whenever you see things getting out of line, you tend to think they're going to normalize. I think what's going on is the market is starting to recognize that this is a reflection of something going on in the rest of the world. That when half the world's population wants to emulate what we've got, those who are on the front lines of that story, the business community, are going to be generating stuff like this. And so I think over time, what we're starting to realize is the world's gotten very small. It's not, doesn't matters not just what's going on here, but it's also what's going on in Asia and Latin America. And this is getting reflected in this picture. For the political world, this generates a lot of anxiety because this picture looks a lot, by the way, like a Gini coefficient, a measure of the income distribution in this country, which looks a lot like what it looks like in Europe and Japan. The truth is, if you're looking at this through a political lens, you're anxious because it's not healthy to have an income distribution skewing like it is. If you're an economist and you think about what's going on behind this is the sound of music to me, because this is telling me that the world is waking up, wants to go to work, and we're helping them do it, and it's happening at a very fast pace, and temporarily it's throwing things out of kilter. But for me, this picture tells you there's something good coming as the benefits of rising living standards in Asia generate more business for us, more opportunities for us, and more opportunities for everybody else. So for me, I don't see a lot to worry about, frankly, and I think that's what the equity market's telling you. And I think the one thing you could say, well, look, this is all fine. The economy doing better. The stock market sees it. It's loving it. But how can this be going on when you think about our long-term fiscal situation? Everybody knows in the longer term, the budget deficits are expected to deteriorate, as Jim will be telling you. But I think the way to think about this, I think the way many of us in the markets are thinking about this is, the truth is, this long-term fiscal situation is not really a fiscal issue. It's really a healthcare issue. And I think with the help of conferences like this and the work that Jim at the CBO have been doing, I think it's helping all of us to understand better that the real issue we face is not so much about budget deficits. It's really, if you go to the core of the problem, it's really about healthcare. And what we know, with the help of Jim's work, what you know is whether you lean to the red team or the blue team, nobody's going to like the future that they see if we don't do something about it. Which is why I think you're going to want to come to conferences like this for a very long time, because this is going to be the issue that we deal with, that we're going to have to deal with. And the main point is, if we can solve the healthcare issue, if we can manage healthcare resources better, you solve the fiscal problem. The fiscal problem is about healthcare. It's not about taxes and about spending. So enjoy the conference. I think you're going to be here for a long time.